This is welcome to the MMA Creators podcast, where today, as you can see, me and Leo are in the studio and we're going to chop it up around UFC 308. We've got a monster card coming up in Abu Dhabi. We've got a lot to discuss with our respective careers. We've got some toe wrestling championship conversations, some big news around that, and a lot of other conversations around the content creator world. So sit back, enjoy, and as always, keep it casual.
I can't think of a better place to start than hitting you with the fact that last night, Toe Wrestling World Championships, the TWC, makes an appearance on Britain's Got Talent.
Yeah, you did say this was going to happen. Was it on television or?
So they do the pre-recorded. So there's two stages to it. You can go to the auditions where they see if you're viable to go onto the TV show, or you get invited straight to the main event, which is what happened. So we had the world champion, 17-time world champion, Alan Nasty Nash, and 3-time world champion, Total Destruction, go on stage and compete in front of the judges, KSI and a couple of other people that done it. I don't think I can say more than that. So it's been a big week for toe wrestling, essentially, is what I'm telling you.
Were you up there to watch it in person, or was this hearsay, small handheld videos, leaked news?
Leaked news. So even better than that, leaked audio. So you're not actually allowed to take videos of it. So they just recorded everything via a voice note and then fed it back to me. So I was sitting there excited as a kid, because last couple of weeks have been quite crazy, to be honest. We got a mention on the House of Commons, which is rascal.
We've got their priorities in order.
Exactly. Yeah.
And rightfully.
Exactly. And then Britain's Got Talent this week, and then we've got some really exciting plans. And it isn't official yet. We need to still finalise the contracts and the terms. But I will drop an exclusive for the pod, because you know I love dropping the exclusive for the pod. We had the Juliana Pena pod exclusive.
We did.
So the next one is, potentially in the next week or so, I will be putting pen to paper for coming the new CEO of Toe Wrestling.
CEO? I thought it was more than that, though. So we graduated now.
So
CEO.
I was coming onto the board, but it was as a full-time position. So we had to find what that full-time position was. And when we spoke about it, a couple of the champions and people on the board basically said, we want you to be the Dana White of Toe Wrestling.
Fucking hell, I did not expect that.
Yeah. So that's what, the world champion at the moment, he owns a percentage of the sport, right? Percentage of the IP, and the production company own a majority stake. So they make up the board. So that's who the conversation's been around. Like I said, nothing's official yet, but that's what it's looking forward to. We just need to sort out the shares and the titles and the contracts, but in a soft term, CEO of Toe Wrestling.
CEO. You are Dana White now.
Yeah. You know what's funny? Have you watched the Vince McMahon documentary?
No, I saw the trailer.
Oh my God.
I didn't want to watch it, though. Do you know what I mean? The guy freaks me out.
No, you have to watch it. For what we do, storylines, for a narrative, the way that he excelled this business, it was incredible. And I don't know about you. Did you ever watch wrestling when you were younger?
A little bit. I was ironically, I was a big CM Punk fan.
Okay.
Which in hindsight would be watching mixed martial arts is probably not the best choice. But I liked it back in the day. I liked playing the games as a kid.
What year is that?
We're talking 2007, 2009, probably around there. Little bit before.
Who's at the peak of the game?
I don't know. Like all the big names that you know now, like Cena, Rey Mysterio. Again, I wasn't like a super fan, but as a kid, you just like the little dude with the mask spinning around doing backflips. So,
Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, exactly. I was a simple child. It's not like how it goes.
I didn't know much about the business, to be honest. I knew the games, I knew the toys, the figurines, those sort of things, but I was never really into it as a kid. It was only when we spoke about it before, when I went to Fight Circus and I saw pro wrestling up close and personal, I had a newfound respect for it.
Yeah, I'm the same.
And I sort of understood it. I finally understood it, because from a very ignorant angle, you come at it, well, it's fake.
Yeah, it's like, obviously, right? You've got to appreciate what they do. This is such a difficult sport to do. If you look at the the injuries these guys sustain. I mean, Logan Paul's probably a really good example of that. You can say what you want to say about the guy, especially with recent news, but I think he really gave an insight towards the younger audience over how dangerous and how taxing on the body wrestling actually is. If you look at his behind the scenes stuff with his vlogs and things, you know, he was injured all the time and still powering through in the middle of what is really a performance. They're pushing through pain and injuries and playing up for the cameras and everything. And really, I don't envy that job at all, but I can definitely appreciate it.
The difficult thing I realized with the role was the character side of it. Because you have to be an actor as well as a performer, as well as an athlete. So it's a really weird dynamic because you have to be all three. And I guess it leans towards things like theatre performances along those lines, but obviously a lot more spectacular. And then you look at some of the stunts they do, and it is insane. So all of that said, I watched this documentary because the boys at Amity, who are the production company that oversee toe wrestling, they said you have to watch this, and there was so much to learn in regards to what not to do and how not to be a creep, for sure, but also the mind behind that was genius. The marketing, the idea, the construct of these storylines and how to pit people against each other to get people invested. There was so much that I took from that. And I was thinking, I was sitting there messaging my friend. I said, am I going to book up the evil Vince McMahon of toe wrestling? Because that is going to be a funny turn if it is. I'm hopefully not going to do that. But that is the update on the TWC. I think it's going to be absolutely crazy in the next couple of years.
I with you at the helm, I believe it more now than I did before. So I'm excited.
What do you... I know we're going self-paced it.
Yeah, because that's all we do.
I'm intrigued. Someone put out comments the other day. It said, I like it when you talk about MMA, but I like it way more when you talk about MMA. And I thought, yeah, that's probably fair. But when I speak to you about it now, obviously you have a lot more context, more than most, right? And you've asked me things on air and off air, but what do you think of the sport as a whole, being as candid, honest as you possibly want?
I think it's mental. Yeah, it's batshit crazy. Of course, but that's what sells. I thought, you know, when I write so many pieces and scripts and everything that I'm doing, the point I always come back to is the excitement of what we haven't seen is what gets people involved, and that goes for anything. But in combat sports, it's just that is the truth. Is what you don't know is going to happen is what gets you invested. And toe wrestling is probably the best example of that because it's so absurd. You can't even really picture it in your head. If someone says the words to you, toe wrestling, you can't even visualize it. So that instantly sets that sort of neuron firing off in your brain saying, I want to know what this is about. That's how I felt about it anyway, when you first told me. So I think there's that initial appeal because it's so insane and it's so outlandish and it's so left field. In a way, that's how MMA really kicked off because it was that appeal of the freak show fight of, you know, multiple disciplines going against each other. Not something you could really picture at the time. And I don't know if you know this, but I feel this definitely goes down a similar vein to toe wrestling. Is actually when they were originally planning the first UFC event, they wanted to add an electrified fence in the cage. They wanted to have sharks in a moat going around the octagon. They wanted to go full insanity with it, right? And then obviously over time we've seen it evolve into a more professional sport as a whole. But maybe that's the route we see toe wrestling go down 20, 30 years down the line. Who knows?
I think that's what I'm realizing it has for it, that a lot of sports don't have. Even if we say arm wrestling, it's always an easy comparison, right? Even if you showed someone that didn't know what arm wrestling was or had never seen it before, there isn't necessarily a shock factor to that because we're so accustomed to people shaking hands even. We're so used to seeing this dynamic. I know it sounds silly, but we are. Subconsciously, we're wired to know that hands lock like that and the fact that people know arm wrestling is not too far removed from that. We are so unconditioned from seeing that with feet that it brings an instant shock factor to where people either say, that's disgusting, what the hell? Or they say, that's really intriguing, what is that?
And they're going to tune in either way, so it doesn't matter.
This is the thing, right? It's that shock factor, and it's the same when you have it in mixed martial arts, when you have maybe Bilal Muhammad's not the best example, but someone like that, where they are loved and they are hated. So people are tuning in to watch him get knocked out, but they're also tuning in on the other side of the coin to watch him win. And I'm starting to see that with toe wrestling now. Even listening to the voice note that I got sent from Britain's Got Talent, as soon as they walked on stage, it's so fascinating. You can hear an audio split just straight down the middle of people being completely grossed out and people being completely intrigued.
That's it.
And it just goes straight down the middle. And I find that such an interesting dynamic because that's how you captivate the audience initially. And we were speaking today, or this week even, with McDojo Life, who anyone in the MMA space will sort of know who they are. And he's getting on board to do a professional camp for the 2025 championships.
That's awesome.
So he'll be training like a full professional toe wrestler. So now what that leans into is what we've spoke before on and off air in regards to getting strength and conditioning coaches to build programs, nutritionists, sleep experts. And now I've reached out to, just so happens that a mutual friend of mine is one of the leading podiatrists in the UK, who leads all the studies for foot health, sport, injuries within that region. So we're going to do a ton of content with him, feed the content and the value back into the people competing, level up the athletes. And as the prize money keeps increasing, it's just going to entice more people.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing because there's no real blueprint for how to level it up in terms of on the professional side of things. Obviously, you have your things that they're, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they're obvious, right? So conditioning, cardio, that's the thing.
Are they obvious?
Well, I guess they're not, right? Because it's such a, as you said, we're not conditioned to visualize that from a physical perspective. Like, we don't know what that affects, with your body, what you need to train. So there's so much to explore there in terms of content. If we're looking with our content brains as creators, behind the scenes, you've spoken about that before, where you can really take that. And of course, for the athletes themselves, how far does that go? What is the ceiling? What's the level? So it's almost, a way I look at it, it's kind of like a history repeating itself sort of thing with MMA. I like to draw that comparison to old MMA because you look at how different the sport was back then compared to now. It really is 9 days. So if you visualize toe wrestling now compared to 20, 30 years in the future,
same.
No idea. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah.
There's not really a way to put it.
And you said there it's obvious, but that's the thing. It really
isn't now I say.
Because the first question people always ask, especially when you say professional, it instantly gets the reaction of, how do you become professional? How do you train? Right?
Yeah.
So it sounds ridiculous from the outside, but when you start looking into it, you start realizing, okay, it's a lot around knee health. It's a lot around leg health. It's a lot around ankle mobility and stability and strength and strengthening a lot of the tendons and the areas there. But the more I go down the rabbit hole of looking at how to do that, the more I realize the crossover to mainstream sports is abundant. Basketball, they are massive on foot health. Because if you think about the sport, it's all impact on the feet. It's all about the ability to move quickly, change direction, be strong. They're having a lot of impact on the joints. So it's all about that. Spoke to McDojo Life the other day. He was mentioning ballet.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And you start thinking about it. You start unraveling all these levels. And what you start seeing is what is going to make the greatest toe wrestling champion in regards to core strength, knee health, ankle mobility, ankle health is translating into almost every sport. I can't really think of a sport at the moment where it's not applicable to a certain degree. So as I'm doing more research and gaining more value from it, we spoke with that podiatrist the other day. He said he would love to, or he said if we were interested in doing any surveys or studies with him, we could do some research papers. So I'm sitting there thinking, not only can we stamp our name on a study of foot health, which translates into any sport, it's also a fantastic way to legitimize what being a professional toe wrestler is, because this guy's at the very top of his field. So
it is mental. There's not really, as I said, there's not really another word for it other than mental. But that's why it's so exciting. As I said, there is no way to even picture this. Imagine if you go back thousands of years, this is everything humanity is built towards. It's the toe wrestling championships.
Well, what's stranger than that is we actually had someone who went into the Great British Library, and there are pictures in almost hieroglyphics of people wrestling with their feet. It's insanity. So when you realize that the sport itself is 50 years old, but there's somewhat enough of a story to tell that it dates back to hundreds, if not thousands of years, and we have the power to tell that story. Let's get into some mixed martial arts.
I was going to look to segue there earlier when you mentioned Bilal Muhammad about being hated and loved at the same time, and I don't think that description can really personify Ilia Topuria any more than that. I actually titled my documentary I did on him about a month ago, The Self-Destructive Rise on Ilia Topuria, and a lot of people had issue with that, and I didn't really understand why, because to me, he's the type of guy who brings so much unadulterated confidence and that brash persona, and, you know, there's elements of him channeling the old Prime McGregor, you know, stealing the belt, etc. And he brings that, but he backs it up in the same way that McGregor did too. And I think, depends on which way you look at it, some people might argue it's going to be the beginning of his downfall by having that hubris and having that confidence. But if he keeps winning, especially against a guy like Max Holloway at UFC 308 next week, there's not really much else you can say, right?
What's the alternative? That's what I always think. What's the alternative? You have option A, where you come out, have full confidence in your skills, you articulate exactly how your fights are going to go, you go out there and deliver, and up until this point, no one's been able to stop you.
Quite literally. No one. Undefeated.
Or you're super humble, saying, Max Holloway is really good, Volkanovski's fantastic champion, all very true, and then you go out and have these performances, but it doesn't match to this outlandish, charismatic image that you're creating. Why would you undersell yourself? Go out there, make as much noise, make as much of a splash as you possibly can, and then if your performances are backing it up as they are now, that's where you get that superstar status. And it's so easy to draw the comparisons to McGregor. You have the tattoo, you have him stealing the belt, you have similar taglines. But I think when you strip all of that away, and the main comparison I make personally is the fact that you have someone that is completely and utterly confident in their skills and what they can do, and then they do it on the brightest stage. And I think if you ignore the rest of what he does, and you just look at that and say a 2016 McGregor, there's not a lot of difference. And let me tell you this, if he goes out there against Max Holloway, points to the middle of the octagon in the first 10 seconds, and genuinely starts trading and knocks him out, let's say in the craziest of circumstances.
I don't think that's that crazy, though. I really don't. Tell me a featherweight in that division that has more power than him. And I know we're talking about Max Holloway's chin, and I know we will get into that. But I don't think that's a crazy possibility. I mean, Topuria, what I've realised about him, and I'm sure you will agree, is when he says something, he means it. Everything he says, he absolutely believes, whether it's about himself or his opponents. He says everything with conviction. As you said, that's where the comparisons to the 2016 McGregor come from. Because everything he says is real and he believes it. And if he says he's going to stand in the octagon in the first 10 seconds and point down, as he did say on, was it Ariel Helwani's show, I believe, I fully believe he will do so. And I think Max Holloway will definitely match that energy because he's exactly the kind of man to do that. He is the man to do that. That's his thing. And if you're asking me in those trades, who's coming out on top because they've got more knockout power, I'm going Ilia Topuria. I truly think that could happen. Obviously, statistically, it probably won't. But I don't think that's a smart move from Max Holloway. I really don't. But then there's that challenging of the egos, isn't it, right? What if he backs down from that? What does that say mentally in that fight, in those opening seconds, if Holloway doesn't trade with it? So it's a lose-lose situation from him. And for me, that's just like perfect bit of promo and mental warfare from Ilia. I'm loving it. I love everything he's doing right now in the game. I think he's just playing the mixed martial arts game to an absolute T.
I would agree, to be honest. I definitely would agree. And there isn't too many ways to rattle Max Holloway. You're likely not going to do it. He's fought everyone. He's fought the very best, the most dangerous. He's been in there since a child. And he's got more experience at that age than almost anyone. And he's accomplished almost everything. But challenging the ego. This is what you said there,
it is,
right?
though, isn't it?
It's challenging the ego because you've got Max Holloway, and when you paint the picture, you said it's his thing. It quite literally is his thing. It's his logo to point at the map. That is the Max Holloway branding. You go and have a look at his logo.
It's a great logo.
A finger pointing at the middle. We've seen it against Ricardo Lamas. We've seen it against, of course, Justin Gaethje, multiple other times in his career. And when Ilia plants that seed, knowing that Max has the BMF belt on his shoulder, that's a whole different dynamic. Because you're not just saying, okay, this is your thing, let me do this and see if you want to entertain it. Because I think in a normal world, Max just teeps him, jabs him, steps away, and the fight goes on as normal. When you have that BMF belt on your shoulder, and you walk into that cage, there's a certain chip that you have on your shoulder and a certain image that you have in your mind, and the fans are going to know it, and Max is going to know it. And we've never, up until this point in his career, seen him shy away from a battle. I genuinely don't know what happens with that. I usually have a good idea. In my head, I'm thinking more times than not, Max just circles, kicks the leg, maybe jabs him, slides out of the way, and the fight goes on as normal. But there's also this part in me that says, no, I actually think
he will. I think he will. He's not going to go back down from that. That's what I'm saying. It's a little bit of a situation with him, because he steps in, he's risking everything. He's risking getting knocked out, which is a very realistic possibility if you look at Ilia Topuria's past records and the power he has. And if he doesn't, he's going to, for lack of a better word, look like a pussy. It's true. Yeah, I mean, it sounds harsh, but that's how he's going to be perceived, at least in those opening moments. And that would plant the seed for Ilia, to really start pressing forward, which I think is going to be the story of the fight. I think we're going to see Max Holloway fight on the back foot. And you made a good point of this after he fought Arnold Allen, when we did an episode after that, way back. Max Holloway was never really known for that. He was always known for his forward pressure and just insane amount of volume to just whittle down everyone in front of him. Yeah. But when the time came when he couldn't do that, with a guy like Arnold Allen who was walking him down, there was questions, okay, can he fight on the back foot? Even at this point in his career, so far through, so many fights. He proved that he could. Looked great against Arnold Allen, a bit more of a technician style, and really picked him apart. So he can do it. But can he do it against a guy as strong as Ilia Topuria? I personally don't think he can, and that's the prediction I've been pretty firm on for a little while now. I'm pretty firm that Ilia Topuria is going to win. How he does it, I'm not sure, but I think it's one of those things. I look back to when you said about Sean O'Malley potentially beating Aljamain Sterling, which of course he went on and did. It just felt like it was his time, right? If the stars had aligned for him to just have that big victory. I think for Topuria, we said that about Volkanovski. Max Holloway is probably equally as difficult in terms of a stylistic matchup. I think it's the same. I just think it's his time. He's in the prime of his career. Everything is where it needs to be. And I think he is just going to dominate. I really do.
Yeah, I definitely think you made a good point in regards to the stars aligning, because that is how it looks. But if we're to flip it onto the other side and talk about that from Max's perspective, everything you just said there, you could equally say for Max, because he's coming off a lot of momentum, which is a hell of a drug in MMA. And the last drug being the most spectacular knockout in UFC history.
You said this right after it happened when we recorded, and I disagreed with you. I said it was Leon Edwards versus Usman.
Can't be.
Yeah, I'm with you now. I swapped them around. I sat on that for a little while. I was like, no, you're right. There is nothing more insane than that. I've watched that knockout back so many times. And as you said, the stars aligning for that moment specifically.
On the buzzer.
On the buzzer.
On the buzzer. And we talk about it being a ridiculous feat, but I need to paint the narrative, because sometimes I think people watch that knockout, they say that it is spectacular, and it is.
Yeah.
And it is. But Justin Gaethje is coming off solid wins to Rafael Fiziev, where it was one of his most disciplined performances. Dustin Poirier, where he got the win back in spectacular fashion with a head kick knockout. And then he goes and fights Max Holloway. Not only does Max look spectacular, he points down in the last 10 seconds, trademark Max, and then puts him out cold on the buzzer of UFC 300 with Justin Gaethje lying bang in the middle of the M for the Monster sponsorship, of which he is sponsored in the biggest card in history.
Yeah.
Honestly, it leaves me speechless of how incredible that moment was. So we always talk about who's coming in form, and you can say all of that for Ilia. But I think when I look at this fight from Max, more times than not, I'm leaning towards Ilia, for sure. But if I'm going to paint the narrative from the other side, I do believe that the techniques that Ilia Topuria traditionally uses. He doesn't kick a lot, but he does have a good low kick. He does. But Max has shown recently he's made good adaptations for that. Had a lot of looks for it in the Volkanovski fight, made good adjustments towards the last rep, towards the later fights. I know that he lost that last fight very dominantly, but it wasn't a story of the kicks as much as it was in the last couple. It was more so the hands, right? Then he fights Justin Gaethje, manages to mitigate that kick for the most part, and Justin Gaethje is one of the very best. And then you look at Ilia, and as fantastic as his boxing is, are there times where he overextends? Sure, there are times where he overextends. So if his head gets a little bit lost in the fight, if he does throw a right hand which has just got a little bit too much fat on it, and Max Holloway has just got the eyes and just got the sharpness in the pocket, boom, boom. We've seen him drop twice in his career with that left high kick. And Max is going to have that advantage in regards to the reach. And he's someone that's going to be able to use it. I think because of the stature of Ilia, Max is going to use techniques like uppercuts. I think he's going to use techniques like the knees. And I think we're going to see that spinning kick that we've seen multiple times against Gaethje. Not as much because the threat of the takedown will be there. I don't think Ilia's going to lean towards his grappling in this. And I think if he does, Max will be able to mitigate it, get back to his feet for the most part if he can use the cage well. I think Max Holloway has a very good shot at winning this fight. And I think he's in a place in his career where if you're undefeated, this could be the worst person to face in the UFC right now.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that, but to counterpoint, you've got to be the best to be the best. And it's true. I know. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, for me, if you're looking for a path to victory for Max, it's the low kicks. Because you look at how heavy and front-footed Ilia Topuria is. It's how he generates so much power. He swings with the fences and plants his feet. And that, for me, is the big path to victory for Max. It's just whittling down with those low kicks. And the footwork as well. I think it was a mistake Volkanovski made, or actually, as a counterpoint, how effective Topuria was at cutting off the cage and preventing Volk from circling out. So Max has got to look for a way to do that. For me, if he can't circle the cage and Topuria cuts him off well, for me, it's the same with the Volkanovski fight. It's just a matter of time before that shot lands. I think it's inevitable. Topuria is too good and too accurate and too disciplined to find that shot over 5 rounds. So it's tricky because you have to look at Max's chin as well. Equally, though, as a counterpoint to that, UFC 300, people forget he did get knocked down for the first time in his career, if I'm not mistaken.
Technically.
I know it was a light one, and I know he was generally okay, but it sets the precedent, doesn't it?
I think the narrative around Ilia, because you made a good point, his footwork's so good. He's so well balanced. He's so soft on his knees. He rolls under the shots he sees coming. He just makes very small adjustments, cuts people off against the cage. Really high-level work. I think a surefire way to be on the back foot, quite literally, in the fight, is to concede possession. Now, this is going to be a lot harder to do, of course, in practical sense. Max has to be bullish in taking that centre and backing Ilia Topuria up. He has to be adamant on doing that. He's probably not going to want to throw a lot of kicks because the threat of the takedown is there. But Max never seems to shy away from that too much. So I do imagine he's going to go left high kick. I do imagine he's going to beat the arms up and the legs. I do. I think he's going to make an investment in the body because he's never held conditioning, Max. That I know. I can tell you that here and now. He may be able to go 5 rounds. He's not having a better gas tank in MMA than Max. He's just not doing it. He's not going to make up that space, I don't believe. He has to take something away. He has to invest early. So he has to invest in the leg. He has to invest in the body. And he has to, I believe, set up the only shot we've seen him liable to, which is that left high kick. So how he does that, I'm not too sure. But he will switch stances, Max. So if I'll put you on a spot for a prediction before we move on in the card, what are you saying for that?
I'm just going to go with what I said. I'm going to go with Ilia Topuria, but I'm going to be different and exciting. Just so I can, if I get it right, I can pat myself on the back. I'm going to go with, I'm going to go with a 5th round knockout. 5th round knockout. And that right hand will land, and it will keep landing. But I think one of them will just be too much, and Max will get cracked. It sounds mental to say, and maybe I am being a bit, extra, but I like the sound of it. I think it's definitely possible. And as I said, it only takes one, and if anyone could do it, it is Ilia Topuria. There is no harder hitter at 145 except from perhaps Josh Emmett. But look how they matched up when they fought. So,
yeah.
I think this might be the time we see Holloway lose his chin. Perhaps. But yeah, 5th round knockout for me, Ilia Topuria, and still.
I could sit on the fence here and say what I truly believe. I can see this fight going absolutely anyway. Absolutely anyway. You tell me at the end of the week this fight plays out, I could believe it.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Really could. I think everything's on the table, just the way that this is built up, the way they currently stand in their careers and how talented they are. However, with all of that said, it's so hard to overlook. Every time I make a prediction, every time I feel tiny bit confident on that, I just listen to Ilia Topuria's interviews. And the way he speaks, he knows something I don't know.
Yeah, 100%.
He knows something I don't know. What is it that he knows that I don't know? And it's his preparation, and it's what he sees in the gym. And I know that that's a dangerous man. I'm going to lean towards a Max Holloway decision.
Oh, okay. So you're just flipping it there. I'm glad we're differing. I always like it when we have different opinions. Because I feel like, as I said, rarely we do. Usually we're in pretty close agreement, at least with who we're picking for a winner on most occasions. So I'm glad you're going the other way.
I'm not confident.
No, neither.
I'm not confident, but that's what I think makes this fight why it's so exciting. And when you talk about exciting fights, I can't think of too many bigger matchups right now than Robert Whittaker, Khamzat Chimaev. And there's been a lot of conversation around this fight. Of course, we were previously meant to have it before.
Yeah.
Khamzat Chimaev pulled out. Just from a general perspective of this, what are your thoughts on this particular matchup?
I mean, for me, if I'm going for, just to get my prediction out of the way, just to make my point, I'm going with my brain instead of my heart. My heart, and who I very much want to win, is of course Robert Whittaker. He is really the hero in this story. That's what this is. I think when you look at Khamzat Chimaev's arc narratively since he joined the UFC, he went from the big, new hot topic. Everyone was loving what he was doing. Fighting felt like once a week. Right?
At one point,
quite literally, yeah. He has the shortest average turnaround.
Multiple weight classes.
Everyone was loving what he was doing. And you fast forward to now, he's barely fighting at all, and he really is the villain. Not many people like him. And to his credit, he's kind of leaning into that heel role in a lot of ways. So for me, I do want Whittaker to win. It's a feel-good story, right? You want Whittaker to get back to that title shot, win that belt back, which he's really been chasing for so long. And you could very much argue without Israel Adesanya's presence, he could be one of the greatest we've ever seen at middleweight. So hopefully we can see him get back in the picture. I would love him to win, but if I have to go with my brain here, the fight's going one of two ways. Because we look at who's got the better conditioning, it's Robert Whittaker. But we look at who's more dangerous in the early rounds, it's Khamzat Chimaev. And you look at the chin of Robert Whittaker, it's not so great. And you look at Khamzat Chimaev's punching power, very dangerous. I think we're going to see a first round knockout for Khamzat Chimaev. And I really hope that doesn't happen. And the other alternative is a Rob Whittaker decision. If he can survive those first 2 rounds, which he has a very good chance to do it. We know how good he is. We know how durable he is in those moments. He can win the fight on conditioning alone. He will just outpace him into those championship rounds and potentially even finish him late. But I'm scared, and I think if I had to pick something, I would go over the Chimaev early knockout. I just see that happening. We've seen Whittaker get wobbled by a lot of different shots. I look back to the Costa fight. That spinning kick had him dancing like a chicken. And we've seen that on multiple occasions.
Dancing like a flipping chicken.
But he did. But you say that like it wasn't that flush. It wasn't the flushest kick I've ever seen.
A heel to the cheek from Paulo Costa.
Listen, I'm with you. I want Whittaker to win. But do I think it will happen? Very highly likely, but I have to go for Chimaev. I just do.
First and foremost, is this 3 or 5? Because it was originally 5.
I think it's 5.
Got bumped to 3, and now it's gone back to 5. Okay. There's a lot to unpack in this fight, to be perfectly honest. There really is, because like you said, he's really gone in these peaks and troughs of how fans have perceived him. Chimaev, of course. And we are at this point where, like you said, he is quite inactive, or very inactive, especially for someone like himself. And the fans aren't necessarily all on board. And they aren't quite as, let's see him go and get the belt and become double, triple champion, like conversations were had previously. I think when I look at this fight, the main thing for me is what I've always said with Khamzat Chimaev. I said this without any whispers in the MMA world, without speaking to anyone close to him. No context really at all. Every single time that he got ill, I said it to you, I've said it in videos I made content around, I believed it was an overtraining issue. He was always getting ill where you would typically have athletes peak for an MMA fight. So a training camp is difficult, but you get a few weeks out and that's when you start beginning to peak your body. Training sessions get more intense. Sparring gets more intense. You're sparring and training heavier and harder than you would in any other situation throughout the year. Yeah. That's when he was getting ill. So a lot of this conversation was around the flu and COVID and all these illnesses, which I do believe there was truth in. But I believe that issue was being accentuated by the fact that he was absolutely killing his central nervous system, his immune system, his physical and his mental health with overtraining. If you hear any conversation around Chimaev, it's always how hard he trains and what he looks like in the training room. He's an animal. And it was always coinciding with exactly when he was going to peak, he would pull out. And that's what fans hated, right? It would be a couple of weeks out, few weeks out, boom, pulled out. Boom.
Just to add to that, I don't think it's just because of that, because I think in a lot of ways, some MMA fans, and I say some, are quite sympathetic towards fire issues and injuries and pullouts. But the difference with Chimaev is when you make these claims and you say these things, he was always the most vocal guy in the room, right? Yeah. Or on the Twitter space, right? Saying the big things. He was going to smash this guy, or would be lurking in people's Instagram comments, you know, saying, oh, I'm going to come for you, I'm going to beat you. And then we'd see the same thing happen over and over again. He's the boy who cried wolf. And I say wolf as a slight pun there. Pause, indeed. Boy cried wolf. So that definitely adds to it, right? And I look back to what Dana White said. Any publicity is good publicity. And if you're liked by the MMA fan base, that's good. If you hate it, it's even better. If you're in the middle, there's no point. What are you doing in the UFC, right? So there's definitely a route Chimaev can take with this. You know, he can lean into that bit of persona, as he already kind of is. And why not, right? He's still one of the biggest stars in the sport. Whether you like him or you hate him, it doesn't really matter. His stock might have gone down, but people are going to watch him fight regardless. It doesn't really matter. And he, hopefully, and I'm going to cross my fingers on record saying this, that we see him make the walk next Saturday. I'm excited.
The reason I built that story first and foremost is because when I then heard in this camp from the horse's mouth himself that he acknowledged, I've been overtraining, I've been running myself into the ground, I've changed teams, changed location, I've not got as many people around me, because I've said this to you before, I've seen it firsthand with what that looks like for him. When I was in Abu Dhabi and he was fighting Kamaru,
I remember.
I saw the amount of people around him. I saw the posse he would have. He would literally go to the mall and there would be 5 Bulls G-Wagons outside and 40 people with him going for dinner.
Lost in the sauce.
Lost in the sauce a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many voices and people around him. I'm not saying they're all bad for him, but it's just a lot of energy. It's a lot of attention. And then his training was suboptimal. So when he said he switched, I was thinking, then we know how good his wrestling is. Then I'm starting to think, okay, I did see him at Bangtao when he's grown into his frame. Now he's looking more comfortable. And I always say to you, I won't say who it is, but I see him go in there in training, in sparring with a current or previously ranked light heavyweight, absolutely smashing him. And I'm just thinking, if you get into the fight healthy, we don't have these conversations of conditioning. I don't believe. I don't think he's ever had a conditioning issue. I think the Gilbert Burns fight was an IQ issue, as well as all of these fights being completely overtrained. He gave all of himself to his training camps. He's going in as a fraction of himself to fight at that crazy intensity.
I'm going to have to counter, because I would be on board with that if we'd seen an example of the opposite. Him going 5 rounds, him looking good at 5 rounds, but we never
never could, because he was demolishing everybody.
Yeah, true, but if you look at the times he'd gone to decision, is there any... Well, I know you said with Burns and with Usman, and I think they are valid points to make. I haven't seen evidence to suggest that he can make it over 5 rounds and look as good as he does in the early stages. There's nothing to suggest until I see evidence that proves otherwise. I'm going to go with the evidence, what we know, right? And what we know is that he cannot really make it past 2 rounds. He starts to slow down drastically. You look at that 3rd round against Usman, I would say without a shadow of a doubt, if there was 2 more rounds in that fight, he's getting finished, or he's at the very least losing by decision, in my opinion. So
I agree. I agree with what you're saying. You're using complete logic, and I feel the same way. I'm just saying, with no evidence, I do believe he's going to have the conditioning to be able to compete with a Robert Whittaker for 5 rounds if he implements his game plan. Now, it's always going to be difficult because he goes out balls to the wall from the get. You're fighting at such a high pace, it's impossible to sustain that. Yeah. So I would like to see how he has evolved his IQ, let's say, because against Gilbert Burns, he said, whatever happens, I'm going to sit down in a trade and I'm just going to let it fly. Now, that isn't the smartest move, right? So it's going to be interesting to see his game plan. But when I look at it in a smaller details and past the victory, Robert Whittaker has fantastic defense in regards to wrestling. We know that. We've seen that time and time again. Now, you can look at his career and say, well, we've seen him against a Brunson. Yep, we've seen him against a Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero never took people down or was as committed to taking people down as Hamza Chimaev. Yeah. He'd use it as a look-free striking, but he was never adamant to take you down and submit you. So I do think they're different styles. We saw against Dricus, of course, he got taken down. Now, I'm not saying that's enough to go and suggest that he's going to go and get mauled by Chimaev, but if you go back and watch the Dricus Duplessis fight, and you go back and you watch the Israel Adesanya fight with Robert Whittaker, there's a theme. Not a big theme, but there's enough of a thing to give me a narrative. Southpaws. There's an issue at times with southpaws. Now, Robert Whittaker's so good, it's hard to find flaws in his game because he's so strong and so well-versed everywhere. It's hard to say, this is how you beat him. And you have to be on. If he is on, and he does go southpaw, I think the jab's there for him. And I think that straight left is there for him. Izzy dropped him with that straight left, and Dricus dropped him with that jab. And if you go back to the Chimaev and Gilbert Burns fight, Hamza Chimaev in southpaw drops Gilbert Burns with that jab. So I can see the striking being an issue for Bobby Knuckles there. Now, he's such a conundrum in himself with his speed, with his timing, with his entries, with that karate style. But I just watched Chimaev grapple, and I think once he gets his hands on you, it's kind of as good as over. So if he's coming in there conditioned and he's coming in there ready to scrape 5 rounds, big if. But let's just say it is. Let's just take his word, right? Let's take his word.
That doesn't mean a lot of these.
No, it means absolutely nothing. Everyone's, this is the best camp of my life. I'm feeling better than I ever have. I'm a better version. Yeah. But let's just take him at face value, just for the sake of the argument, right? Let's say he is that of himself. Does Robert Whittaker have enough to sustain the power of the striking and then the grappling?
Early rounds, no. This is my point. I think it's about survival. I think you should just write those first 2 rounds off because Chimaev will set a pace so draining with that ground. I'd be very confident that Whittaker is going to get taken down. He is going to get dragged around. If he could do it to Usman, and I don't like to use MMA math, but Usman is one of the best wrestlers in combat sports, and Chimaev had his way with him in those early rounds. I think he can do the same to Whittaker, who, let's not forget, was also a welterweight at one point in time. So in terms of a size difference,
for sure,
with that, you can't really run with that narrative. So for me, I do think Whittaker is going to get dragged around in those early rounds. If he can survive, for me, it's his fight to lose. I really do think that. Because as I said, we have no evidence to suggest that Chimaev can go late. And it is 5 rounds, thankfully. And that, for me, is the absolute golden opportunity for Whittaker to absolutely take over. Because you've got to understand, it's so hard and draining to shoot for those takedowns. It really is draining. And it's becomes so much more easy to read and defend against when the guy shooting the takedown doesn't have the energy to do so. And that is where Whittaker is going to start to take over. And that's what I hope is going to happen. Will it happen? I don't know. As you said, there's definitely striking opportunities for Chimaev to take over, particularly from that southpaw position. So, yeah, I'm scared for both men, but that's why I'm also equally very excited because it's a matchup long time in the making.
I would say, the last thing I'll say on this is we know how good Rob is. We know he has the ability to beat everyone. And I think we're going to see him improve, but we're not going to see exponential changes in his game. No. I don't believe. I think that'd be fair to say at this point in his career. I don't think we've seen anywhere close to the potential of Hamza Chimaev. Anywhere close. So I think when you look at a potential matchup with Chimaev against anyone right now, I think there's always this grey area of, I don't even think he's performed to anywhere near his capabilities, a lot of these performances. And if he is to do that, because he is comfortable in the limelight. You think of that fight in Abu Dhabi where he's sitting on top of the cage with Darren Till. That was a cool moment. The arena goes green for Gilbert Burns and Chimaev's chilling there with Darren Till. He's comfortable there, is my point. So if he brings those skills to the table, he is better conditioned. He actually has energy to fight. I think he has more gears to kick into that we've not necessarily seen before. But if I press you for a prediction, what are you saying?
I have to pick one, don't I? That's the thing. I have to say one with chest. I'm going to go with the early finish for Chimaev. I think first or second round, I'm going to go first round. I think that power, which is in a lot of ways actually slept on. I think people forget how strong Chimaev is with his fists. And we've seen historically Whittaker's chin not necessarily holding up. I think Chimaev might find that early finish. But if it doesn't happen, for me, as I said, Whittaker's fight to lose. So I'm going to go with the Chimaev first round knockout.
Again, it's one of those fights I wouldn't be surprised if Bobby Knuckles goes.
Yeah, 100%. That's why this card is so exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why it's just so annoying sitting here, because you want to sit on the fence and say, well, I can see it going this way. But the truth of it is, if I'm going to be, again, like you said, say over a bit more chest, I'm going to say I see a second round stoppage for Chimaev. I can see a world in where he can submit Bobby Knuckles. I don't think that's going to be easy. I don't think it's going to be easy at all, but I think he can either submit him or get him into a very nasty position where, let's say, he has full back mount and he's just boom, 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 winging shots left and right and gets a TKO stoppage.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. There's so many avenues for this fight.
That's how I see that one going.
This is a perfect example of what content creating can look like. You can walk into the podcast studio, you can have your cameras ready, you can have your SD cards, your micro SD cards, the lighting set up, the audio level set up, but what you forget to do is not hit record on one camera, two cameras, or even three. The flipping audio is a non-recording. And that is just how this game goes sometimes. And honestly, I've had experiences very recently where I've had big opportunities and they haven't gone well. They have not gone well. And you are sat with two options. Number one is you sit there, you dwell, and you chew yourself up sick about how you could have been better, performed better, edited better, filmed better. But the reality is, you can't change any of it. None of it. So every second that goes into that is nothing but inefficient, wasted energy. So although it's not easy, you have to just sit there and say to yourself, this is painful, but the only option I have from this is to learn from it and not make it again. That is the only option. How do I level up from this and how do I not make the same mistake? So a fantastic lesson.
Yeah, you're sounding a lot like an MMA fighter there too. I think that those are some principles that can definitely be applied to anyone entering the octagon suffering a loss, for sure. Yeah, not the greatest thing to ever happen to us, especially with an in-person episode, which we haven't done in a while, but what can you do? As I said, no use crying over spoiled milk. Spilt? Spoiled or spilt? Spilt. Is it spilt? Why didn't you correct me earlier?
Because you may be right. I've just I don't know. Spilt, to be perfectly honest. But it is true. And I said to you before, and this isn't an original thought, but it is something that I always have in my mind, is there isn't one set way to get good at MMA. There isn't one set way to get good at podcasting or editing or content creating. There really isn't. Everything is pretty much the same. Now, if you look at it on a surface level, there are obviously going to be contrasting differences between becoming a professional MMA fighter and becoming a full-time podcaster. But when you really dig into how you level up, how you improve, how you deal with setbacks, for the most part, it's all the same. It really is all the same. And what I've noticed for myself recently is I've just got relentless about improving my habits on such a micro level that I just let them compound until they're not quite on a micro level. So what started in my head is I would love to do 2 Muay Thai sessions a week.
I was going to ask you about this, actually.
It's not a crazy amount, right?
Yeah.
It's not a crazy amount. Go on.
Yeah, because I saw you posting a sparring clip, and I know you do reuse old stuff from Thailand, which I know was from a while back, but there was a clip of you in GBTT hitting the pads. Is that recent?
That was the other day. So
Lovely.
I went in there to have a training session, and every fiber of my being said to myself, don't post the clip where you're 4 rounds deep, you can't breathe, and your
You know the feeling.
small amount of skill has diminished because you're tired. I don't have a large amount of skill to fall back on when I get tired. So especially when I am tired, it's a hard watch, especially for someone like myself who spends a lot of time looking at how to improve things or listening to very high-level coaches of how to improve technique and how to improve execution. So I watched that training footage back and it sickens me a lot of times. But
You're your harshest critic.
True, but also I'm logical. I'm very honest. I'm not being harsh on myself. I'm actually just very fair, but I can see glaring holes. For the most people, if you started playing football for the first time or started MMA for the first time or Muay Thai, whatever it may be, training, a lot of people don't have 3 years relentlessly spent looking at how to improve those things from a visual perspective or an audio perspective. So I watch those, but I want to be accountable to my brand, the clothing I wear within the videos, but also to leveling up the process, because that's what Casuals Corner is all about.
You are a
right?
casual. It's pretty fitting, is it not?
That's the whole vibe of the brand, with the clothing, with the food fighters, with Casuals Corner. It's that idea of embracing starting at no, embracing being bad and being bad in public, which is a difficult thing
I could not
to do.
That's tough. In person, out in the street, is that what you mean? Or do you just mean...
Everything. I just mean everything. Being bad in public, in person, is actually not public anymore. Because if I go into the street and I make a mistake, let's say public speaking, there may be 20 people there, 50 people that walk past on the street, not a lot of people. If I do that same thing online, I could have 1 million people watch that video. It's very plausible. It's happened before.
Yeah.
So you're then in a position where you have to make mistakes in front of a lot of people and be very vulnerable and be willing to understand that, okay, I'm not where I want to be at the moment, but I'll be accountable to myself, to my platforms, and I promise you I'll get better. This is my plan of how I want to get better, and this is the journey to getting better.
I think it's a very sobering thing, though, to take into account that, you know, there's a negative and positive way to spin this, but people's memories are so short, whether that's online or in person. So if they see you mess something up, you get a fact wrong, you stumble over your words, or it could be the most embarrassing thing that could ever happen to you, 99% of those people are going to forget that entire event or situation or scenario after 5-10 minutes. And if that, yeah. So I think once you acknowledge that and you really just take that into account, it frees you up to do things you probably wouldn't do before, and take that extra step and be a little bit brave, whether that's public speaking or getting in front of the camera. And the more and more you do it, of course, there adds that extra level of comfortability, right? You're a perfect example of that. You know, I've spoken to you so many times about watching your first episode of Casuals Corner back, and you are terrible. And I know you wouldn't mind me saying that, because you've improved tenfold and you've gotten comfortable with people watching your content and gotten comfortable with people looking at you making mistakes. And I'm the same. Like I look back on my old videos, some factual mistakes. There was a lot of factual mistakes in some of my old videos because I didn't do my due diligence with my research as much as I probably should have, or I thought I knew more than I did. You know, bad audio quality. I could go on. There's so many different nitpicks and things. But the best thing is no one really is that bothered about it. No. So, yeah. So if you take that into account, I feel like once you do that as a content creator, and that goes for anyone looking to get into the game, you'll improve tenfold as a result of that, in my opinion. I think just freeing yourself up mentally and just focusing on your own thing and not worrying about those little errors, because they're going to come and they are inevitable. Look at us today forgetting to record with the microphones. And we've both been doing it for you 3 years, right? And me too, if I'm not mistaken. So anyone can do it, right? There's no limit to mistakes. It's inevitable. So
don't
get
think
comfortable
anyone
with
can
that.
do it, to be honest.
You don't think that's...
I think people could improve, but I don't think anyone could do it at a high level.
Oh, no, I meant mistakes. Everyone can make mistakes.
Everyone can most certainly do those.
Yes, absolutely.
Most certainly do those. It's like anything, right?
Yeah.
Could you improve at football? For sure. Everyone could improve at football. Could everyone improve at football where they're a professional footballer and playing in the League One or Premier League? No. That's the truth of it, right? You have to still be the 0.1% at the core of it. You can improve any skill over time. But what you said there, it is spot on, because not only does no one care and no one remember, it always comes back to what we always say, and what a mentor of mine always says whenever I have ideas and what I pass on to you, I say, what's the downside? Right? What's the downside? So if you're sitting there in front of the camera or at home and you've got this grand plan to create content because it feeds into this business idea you had, or this project you had, or this personal branding mission that you have, what's the downside? The downside is you cringe when you listen to yourself back. People play your videos in front of you, and
that I don't like. I still don't like. It's a weird thing.
You'll get over it.
Just interject. I have no problem with watching and listening to myself back whenever I'm editing, because you just get desensitized, right? But whenever someone you know starts playing your videos out loud, I can't stand it. I don't know if you're the same. I find it so weird.
You get over it.
Yeah, well, you say that. It's been 2 years. In fact, 2-year anniversary of my channel just only a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, celebration for that. In fact, I said this after my first year anniversary, 364 days after I made my channel. So just before I hit 10,000, and exactly a year on from that. So one day before my second year anniversary, we hit 30,000. So quite literally double the amount within a second year.
I think within the next 12 months, I think that's 80,000.
Yeah. My goal, I always go further with the goal. I said by the end of next year, I want 100,000.
Yeah.
And I know that's like, it is plausible, which is why I'm still aiming for it. And it is probably going to be really difficult. But if you set high expectations, you're never going to get disappointed. That's my logic with it. So I'm content either way. I think my channel's going at a good rate. I said 40,000 by the end of this year. At the end of last year, I said I wanted 40k by the end of 2024. Why not, right? We're probably not going to hit it, but we're not going to be far off. And I think that's more than I can ask for.
It leans into just what I was speaking to a second ago in regards to what's the downside. Well, the downside 100%. Is, okay, it's cringe watching your videos back, or people may laugh at you, or any number of things that people will be embarrassed by or not feel confident enough to do. Okay, cool, that's a downside. And most certainly they're all relevant. And I'm not saying, don't worry about those. That's not tangible advice, right? Yeah. You need to work on those. And really what that all comes down to is your own image of yourself. Once you become more comfortable with yourself, and once you become more comfortable with the people around you, knowing whose opinion you value, knowing where to put value in.
Yes, 100%.
That begins to change. With repetition, it begins to change. So that's the downside. 100%, that's the clear thing people always pick up. What's the upside?
Everything and more.
Anything and everything is the upside. Anything and everything is the upside. So in life, or just any decision, is always about the pros and cons, if you like, the downside to the upside. So there's always downside to this, yeah, for sure. And there's going to be moments where it's uncomfortable and you don't like it, but what's the upside? So if you're really sitting there thinking, okay, I really want to make this work, or really want to make this business grow, whatever it may be, you kind of have two choices. You can either succumb to the room which is more comfortable, where you don't do anything and you're not subject to criticism or feedback.
Yeah.
Or you reduce your ego, reduce your meaning on what other people, how other people value you or interpret you, and you just say, right, okay, I'm going to try and extract value or constructive criticism from everything, try and improve, and I'll get to a stage where I'm essentially just going to, I always like this thing, I've said this to you before, is Alex Hormozy said it once when he was speaking to his therapist, I believe it was, and he was saying he was going to a school reunion, and he was saying, I'm looking forward to it because I've done X, Y, Z now with my career, and I'm looking forward to go and sort of show off a little bit because these guys always bully me for da-da-da. And they said, your mindset's way off. Your mindset should be in a place where it's similar to that video of when you zoom out from the Earth.
Yeah.
And you just keep getting further away from the Earth and you just see how much of a microscopic detail this is in the planet. And that should be your mindset.
Then you go even further and then you realise none of it matters at all anyway.
None of it matters, right? Yeah. And that's always the mindset that I'm trying to deploy. Every time that you have this intrusive thought of trying to impress this person or trying to get this accolade because it means this to signaling or projecting that we all do in certain ways, you then think, no, my mindset's too small. I need to think in a way where these people or these things are irrelevant because I'm so far removed with what I'm operating on. And then you get in this space where you're so consumed by your work, so consumed by your brand and your business, if you want to be, it all just becomes irrelevant because it's not conducive to the overall goal of growth.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, is growth. So there's sacrifices you can make with that. Right, there might be obstacles in the way, but I think if you look at a net positive, if you're making a decision, whether it's financially, creatively, anything, particularly within work and what we do, I think the end result should always be growth. Like, I was actually going to speak to you about this off air, but we've got time.
Do we?
Oh, we have a little. Actually, no, maybe we don't.
A couple of minutes.
Yeah, a couple minutes. So I talked to you about looking at hot desking or at co-working offices. So there is a financial implication with that, and it is quite expensive, but it's probably something I might look at doing because I feel it would be a net positive growth-wise. It would stimulate me creatively because being in the same location at once, particularly at home, working at home, is a draining thing. Anyone can really speak to that. So that's something I'm looking at doing, and I think that will probably help me create way better content and network with a lot of people, which is another thing that I'm going to look at doing too. So
yeah, I think you have to just be relentless about improvement and being in a frame of mind where you're have an eye on the bigger picture of how you want to improve in the long term, but also understand what that looks like in the short term and just be continually just dissecting what you're doing. And week to week, maybe you don't always make exponential strides. It's just not going to happen. But if you're constantly looking, right, how am I working this week? How's my organization? What can I make more efficient? It all feeds into that bigger picture. And I think something like you said there with a hot desking is a good example of that, because I found myself that you get stuck there, sitting at home, working at the desk, and you have this feeling in the back of your mind of, I love what I do and I'm so grateful and I couldn't think of anything I want to do more, but
there's no the enjoyment. You're losing that enjoyment.
I feel flat.
Flat is the word.
I feel flat. And I don't feel inspired, and there's something I need to change. For me personally, I've gone into the TWC offices once a week now, and for you that may look like hot desking, which is kind of the same thing in a large part. So again, I think that just comes back to continually stressing over, how can I improve? Let me assess my performance. Let me assess where my mind's at. How's my mind feeling? Am I feeling I'm getting up every day energized? Okay, I'm not. What can that be? Okay, well, yesterday I ate like crap. Day before I ate like crap. The other days I ate well. So let's maybe look at my diet. How can I improve my diet? How can I improve my sleep? How can I improve my hydration? How can I wake up every day being as good of a version of myself as I can possibly get? Yeah. Can it be stupid things like I'm sitting on my desk for extended periods of time? Okay, I'm going to be working on my mobility. How can I do that? Well, I can just have my leg there and just open up the hips, right? Yeah. This is something I've started doing. And then what you start realizing is not only do physically you feel better and mentally very small parts of you start getting more efficient, let's say, but then especially if you have a physical goal, for me, I want to improve my Muay Thai. For you want to improve your Jiu-Jitsu. It goes hand in hand. And it comes back to what I said earlier. I don't think there's any set guidelines of how to get better at editing. I think it's the same of how to get better at Muay Thai. I genuinely believe that to a large part. Everything overlaps if you look at it a certain way and use a certain perspective. And I think when you stress over that, you just get those exponential gains. And I think for both of us, we're always going to be hungry people. Yeah, for sure. People with big goals. And I like that about us. But also realizing that on a more consistent basis, we scrutinize over the smaller details and try and improve in a multitude of ways, I think. Yeah, mic drop right there. That was a nice little chain of conversation. But this has been the MMA Creators Podcast, episode number 74. Was it 74 or 75? Doesn't really matter. We'll see you soon next Sunday. Have a good one.